Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Zuber, and I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar Top 5 Digital Transformation Challenges and How to Overcome Them. Before we get started, I would like to make you aware of a few technical items. All of you who are listening to the presentation are currently on mute. To ask a question at any point during the presentation, just use the Q&A dialog at the bottom of the screen you will see in just a few minutes. Keith will field as many of these questions as he has time for at the end of the presentation. And if he does not have time to answer your question, don't worry. I will save all the questions we don't get to and refer them to Keith so that he can get back to you. Keith Siako has more than 30 years of experience working in sales and customer service, with 25 years of those spent with QSM. As Vice President, his primary responsibilities include supporting QSM clients with their estimation and measurement goals, managing business development and existing client relationships. He has developed and directed the implementation of the sales and customer retention process within QSM and has played a leading role in communicating the value of QSM tools and services to professionals in the software development, engineering, and IT industries. So now I would like to turn the presentation over to Keith Siako.
Make sure I'm unmuted. Sorry, I think I just muted myself. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks Laura for the introduction. Really appreciate it. Today we're going to talk about digital transformation. It's an exciting new topic, or not an exciting new topic. It's an exciting topic that QSM works on just about every day. And before we get started with the digital transformation discussion, I want to start by giving a little bit of background on QSM. So QSM, what we do is we help our clients with project and portfolio estimation. We've been in business for over 45 years, and we're known for being the developers of the SLIM suite of tools. And in addition to that, we are a services company and a research provider. At QSM, we have one of the largest industry databases in the world of completed projects. So we use that data to enhance our research and validate the tools and the services that we provide for our customers. A little bit of background there. Some of the highlights, the sweet spot for us is getting that big picture right. That big picture with getting targets set for cost and schedule and quality goals and targets. In addition to getting the big picture, of course, we do very detailed level estimating and measurement. But one of the beauties of our solutions is we can get a very early start. We can take a look at very reliable estimates even before detailed planning takes place. And this is especially valuable when we're dealing with big programs like digital transformation programs. Our solutions focus a lot on risk trade-off analysis. We include industry trends from that big industry database that we have. And we use the analytics from our tools to help our clients improve their negotiation capabilities with their own stakeholders as well as with their clients. One of the big things that we focus on is we help our clients manage uncertainty very early in the planning process. That helps us a lot with these big digital transformation programs. And one of the nice things about working for QSM is we can work with what data you have available when we're working with our clients. So, a lot of people think, to estimate these big digital transformation programs or to work on them, that they need a lot of data available. And that's simply not true. As long as we can work with a little bit of data and we can kind of work with what you have, there's no process maturity restriction to be able to do some of the things that you're going to see today during this webinar. So I wanted to give you a little background on QSM before we jump into the digital transformation discussion. So what is digital transformation? Digital transformation is the process of using technology to create new business processes and to improve the customer experience as well as the internal organization experience. The problem is people face a lot of challenges with transformation work. In a McKinsey survey said the success rate for transformation was found to be less than 30%. Bain & Company, another research firm, said that only 8% of global companies have been able to achieve their targeted outcomes. So targeted outcomes, success with digital transformation. These things can mean, hitting your cost and schedule targets, implementing a new software process improvement program, moving your data warehouse to the cloud, things like that. So it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. We're going to try to touch on multiple uh, multiple ideas today, and then we're going to take some questions early in the presentation, and then we'll save some room at the end as well for additional questions. Because of the popularity of digital transformation and all the work that QSM does in this area, we decided to do a poll. We did it on LinkedIn, and we asked my LinkedIn connections, what is your biggest digital transformation challenge? And we came back with a lot of valuable information. We're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about some of the challenges people face, and also why are these challenges there, and maybe some ways that we can help overcome them. Biggest transformation challenge that we heard about was capacity planning. 42% of those polled said that capacity planning was their biggest challenge. 29% said continuous integration. 10% said vendor bid evaluations, and 19% said other. And the most prevalent of the other responses were dealing with size and scope and communication issues. So no real surprise there. Dealing with size and scope and communication issues comes up pretty regularly with digital transformation programs, as well as just your normal day-to-day development type of work in the technology field. So we're going to address it in relation to digital transformation today. So we'll go with capacity planning first. We'll talk a little bit about it. Why is this hard? Well, number one, it's tough to get the right number of people in the right place, right? Usually we have a lot of different vendors. We have a lot of different groups internally within the organization, all trying to work together. We're trying to staff up all these different programs. We might have 100 releases to a particular program within a digital transformation. So it's tough to get people assigned to the right place that meet the right skill set, which dovetails with, just large scale complexity in general. Planning for an entire organization is a tough thing to do, especially when we're doing outsourcing in addition to the internal development work. Number three, unrealistic expectations. Organizations want to staff up quickly. The reality, though, is that it takes time, and it takes time to get smart on new processes. And that's usually what we're doing with transformation programs. We're learning new things. We're trying to implement new processes. So getting the right people in place, the large scale complexity of everything, and then just the expectations of trying to get everybody staffed up and smart on the new processes quickly. How do we meet this challenge? Well, at QSM, we have a digital transformation practice and a consulting practice that's been around for a long time. So in addition to talking to customers, I also talked with some of the consultants at QSM, kind of to hear what their day-to-day challenges that they hear about on a day-to-day basis. And how do we meet these challenges is we use a top-down estimation approach to help with the early planning, right? Top-down estimation is designed for early decisions, and only a minimal amount of information is needed. Second way we meet this challenge is we recommend using industry data and historical data to help sanity check early planning and early estimates, right? So with QSM, we have that large industry database, so we leverage that to help our clients try to figure out, what should this cost, how long should it take, very early in the planning process. And the number three way we try to meet this challenge is we try to analyze risk early in the planning process in order to optimize the staffing effectively. We want to take a look at things like what are the impacts of a bigger team versus a smaller team. We want to be able to analyze the overall portfolio for risky programs. And we're going to show some examples of this as we move forward here. This is the first example. So this is actually coming from the QSM tools, and this is actually a release level capacity planning estimate. You can see in the chart that we've got a staffing profile. This is actually an estimate for total number of people over time. You can see that we're ramping up on this estimate. This is for a release within a transformation program. We're ramping up to 30 people. That's what the estimate's saying over 12 months. You can see this blue shaded region here kind of shows the ramp up of people and then the gradual tapering off as we get closer to delivery. And then if you look at the bottom chart, we've got this same staffing profile, but now we're breaking it out by role by month. So in addition to seeing that it's going to take about 30 people to deliver this particular release over a 12-month period, we can also see how much money we're going to be spending with development, with QA, with testing, right? With support staff. So by using these types of tools and models, we can see early what this should cost, how long should it take, and how many people do we need to figure out what level of capacity we need to fulfill the demand. Now, what's going on behind the scenes here? What we did was within the QSM tools, we actually input a scope measurement, scope or functionality. We told the QSM tools and models how much work we needed to deliver for the client. And then we came up with what we call a productivity index, which is calculated from our historical data. And then by inputting that information and then leveraging the historical data, we were able to figure out how many people we would need to deliver that scope at that level of productivity. Now, the productivity index, we're going to be talking a little bit more about this. You'll be hearing this as we go forward a little bit more. The productivity index is calculated based on historical data. Once we know on a project that's been completed or a release or product delivery, once we know how much functionality was delivered and how much time and effort was spent, we can calculate this productivity measure. The productivity index takes into account the overall maturity of the process, the tools and methods you might be using, the complexity of the work, and the experience level of the people. Okay, so by inputting a scope or functionality measurement and a productivity measurement and some historical data on some previous projects, we were able to figure out how many people should we staff this release up to and how long is it going to take to finish. So we're using a model-based approach and we're using historical data to help us with the digital transformation. This is just one release within an overall digital transformation. We're going to talk a little bit more about the bigger picture as well as we move forward. The other thing we want to do is we want to be able to sanity check these estimates with industry data, in addition to our own historical data. You can see here, this is a scatter plot from one of the QSM Slim Estimate tool. And you can see in the center there, we've got a trend line that represents the industry average for the type of project we're working on for the staffing levels. So what we're trying to do is figure out what's the optimum staffing level. How many people should we allocate to this particular release, whether it's a vendor project or whether it's an in-house project. We're going to do it the same way. We're going to run the estimate, and we're going to see here in blue, that's my estimate for total staff, for peak staff. And you can see the trend line that represents the industry average. And then these triangles represent other projects that we've completed in the past. And these can be projects we've completed internally or releases that vendors have completed for us. So by looking at this type of analysis, we can see, are we staffing this correct? Are we staffing this effectively? Are we putting too many people on? Are we not staffing it up enough? This is going to give us a gauge to see, how many people we should put on this particular release. And then we're going to also use these types of techniques at the portfolio level. We're going to show that in a few minutes. In detail, this is kind of a high-level portfolio view. Same type of idea. Now we're looking at multiple releases within a digital transformation. And you can see here I've got multiple roles estimated over time. And again, we're estimating the capacity. How many people do we need to deliver this overall portfolio? The previous view, we showed the release level, right? We showed a scatter plot, sanity checking to make sure we had the right number of people. Now we're looking at a portfolio estimate to make sure that we have the capacity to fulfill the demand at the transformation level, right? This would be all of our releases and projects within the transformation. And what we did here was we actually estimated each release, and then we rolled them up in what we call the Slim Master Plan tool, where we can look at the portfolio level estimates. You can see here we've broken it out by different color codes by role. You can see the developers are this sort of fuchsia color here. And you can see it's telling us to deliver this successfully, we're going to need to ramp up to about 200 developers. Now, if we only have 150 on staff, that's a red flag. That's a problem. So this is going to give us a heads up early how many people we're going to need at the macro level, at the transformation level. And then the other thing we wanted to do is we want to be able to analyze the portfolio for risky programs. Here we're looking at that same portfolio. We can look at all the project estimates independently. You can see a green shaded square in the middle. That represents our historical data. These data points that you see are estimates that we've run for each release within the digital transformation. And you can see that some of these projects are outliers to where we want to be. So these are estimates where, and you can see on the chart here, we said too high of a productivity, low effort. So on some of these estimates, maybe if you're working in a vacuum, you're only looking at an estimate, you're not looking at the whole portfolio. Maybe this estimate looked okay. But when we compare it to the other projects in the portfolio, in the overall transformation, we can see that we assume too high of a productivity on this estimate, and therefore the cost or the effort goal is a little bit less than what the industry data says to where we should be. So high productivity, lower cost. And then these down here, I didn't give myself enough credit. I assumed too low of a productivity, so the costs are a little bit higher, and therefore they're outside the historical data range there as well. So these projects, we'd probably want to take a second look when we're trying to plan the whole transformation, right? So each one of these is a release or a project or a product delivery within the digital transformation. And now we're looking at the big picture to see which estimates hang out, which look good, so we can move forward with confidence. We'll take just a couple minutes. Wanted to pause for some questions, just kind of midway through here, or not quite midway through, just to see if there are any questions at kind of a high level from anybody in the audience.
Yeah, hi, Keith. This is Laura.
Hi,
We
Laura.
have a question that says, how do you measure the amount of work to be done? Are story points an option?
Great question. In fact, we're going to get into more details on that as we get into the webinar. But yes, story points is definitely an option. There's multiple ways that you can measure the work. We would start at the release level. We could use, if you're doing Agile, we could use story points. We could use epics. We could use user stories. We could use features. For folks that are not doing Agile, we can, anything that you're comfortable with as far as measuring functionality and that you can be consistent with is what we would recommend. And I'm going to show some examples as we get through, as we go through the webinar a little bit. Actually, sizing is one of the challenges that we face, and I'm going to show you some examples. But definitely story points is an option. Absolutely. And thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you. And continue.
Okay. Challenge number 2, continuous integration. And we hear this a lot. Why is it hard? Well, the reason, number one, it's hard because significant upfront effort and productivity variations have to be accounted for. And that's a tough thing to do very early in the planning process. We're going to show some examples of how we can help with that. Number 2, code changes from multiple groups get submitted at different times. This can be confusing, especially when you might have 100 vendors working on a digital transformation. You might have internal teams working alongside. When one vendor finishes, it might bump into the next release. It might be a totally different vendor. This causes a lot of complexity, and it's tough to measure. It's tough to predict when things are going to happen and how much it's going to cost. Number 3, because of the product delivery and the testing occurs at regular intervals, we have to be testing all the time. Quality standards have to be taken a look at continuously. So this is a big challenge when there's a lot of moving parts and when you have multiple vendors and multiple groups working together. How do we meet this challenge? I'd say number 1 is measure effectively. Measure, right? So we want to measure the cost, scope, staffing, schedule, quality. We want to use metrics as a part of our planning process. And I can tell you there's so many people that don't, right? And they don't use, a lot of people don't focus on the project and release level. They start off kind of in a bottom up way where they're trying to figure out how many hours is each person going to work. and they try to roll it up and kind of guess at the overall integration and testing and development costs. What we like to do is take a top-down approach and actually measure cost and scope and productivity as part of the overall program. So leveraging metrics as part of the planning process is one way to help. Number two, we want to be able to identify a minimum viable product, right, or an MVP, as we might call it later on in the webinar here. We want to be able to know not only the cost and the schedule. When is this going to be done? When is each release or piece or integration going to be done? But we also want to know, is it going to work? What's the quality going to be like? So we want to be able to measure defects. I'm going to show some examples. And we also want to be able to take into account the complexities in the overall portfolio delivery as part of that transformation. So how do all these pieces fit together? How do they affect one another? I need a big picture view. I need a big picture estimate to help overcome these types of challenges. So this is an example of how we would use multiple metrics to figure out how we're going to deal with the continuous integration. So this, if I look to my left here, I can see an estimate. This is for staffing. You can see the blue there, staffing profile. It's telling us we're going to deliver this particular release within the transformation within 10 sprints. With 10 sprints, it's going to take about 4.7 months. It's going to cost $1 million, a little over $1 million, with 8 people. Okay. In addition to that, we're going to work to, this is the estimates assuming we're going to work to a level of productivity. Remember, I mentioned that productivity index of a 15.0, and we're going to deliver about 230 stories within those parameters. Okay, that's at the release level. So we're taking into account the effort, the productivity, and the quality to help measure a release within this continuous integration process within the overall digital transformation. If I look to my right, you can see I've got that same release, and I've broken it out in more detail. I've broken the effort out by role by month. So not only can I see that it's going to take 4 months or almost 5 months at $1 million cost with 6,700 person hours, I can also see how much am I going to spend for each role within the organization: product owner, scrum master, testers, developers in this example. So we're taking the time to take into account the productivity and the quality. You can see here on the chart, I've got a mean time to defect of almost a little over a day. Mean time to defect is measuring quality in that it measures the amount of time that elapses between discovered defects. And we can break that out by severity category. It can be, time discovered between critical defects or cosmetic or whatever in between, whatever you'd like to measure. But in this particular estimate for this release within this transformation program, we're looking at almost a day and a half mean time to defect, 4.5 months with about 8 people at a level of productivity of 15. Now, how do we get this productivity measure? Remember, we got this from our historical data initially to run the estimate. Maybe we had a few projects that were similar to some of the releases we're dealing with within the continuous integration process. And we were able to figure out, how long did that other release take? How much did it cost? How much effort was spent? So we calculated the productivity from those releases. We used that when we ran the estimate here to help us figure out on this new release how much it would cost and how long it would take to finish. Take a little deeper dive so that we can really get a handle on quality, because of the continuous integration, we're going to be testing constantly because of all the integration work, code drops being different times from different groups. So we're going to measure quality here. Got some additional analytics views. Here we're looking at the defect rate, which is the number of defects per month. And you can see we gradually ramp up. We're starting to see more defects as we get into development, more further into development. And as we get more towards delivery, you can see the ramp down of defects. Defects remaining, you can see we start off high, and then as we get closer to delivery, we're having less and less. We've got the mean time to defect, which I mentioned earlier, which was about a day and a half on that previous release estimate. You can see here we start where we're seeing defects regularly. We're not seeing a lot of time between defects initially, but then as we get closer to delivery here, we can see on this particular release estimate, we're up to about 5 days before discovering a defect. And then here we can see the cumulative defects, about 1,200 defects overall on this release within the transformation. So this is going to help us next time we run an estimate for the next release within the same digital transformation program. We're going to be able to see, wow, we had 1,200 defects on the last project or product delivery. Is that similar to what we're about to start? So that we can use that information to help us estimate more accurately. So you see what we're doing here. We're using models and historical data at the release level. And then we're going to roll all this up to get the overall transformation cost and schedule. And we're going to be able to take into account all the dependencies from release to release, all the different vendors, all the communication issues, all because we're measuring regularly at the release level and then at the portfolio level. And we're taking into account productivity and scope, not just cost and effort, not just how many hours each person's going to work, but at the release level, what's the big picture? Speaking of big picture, this is actually a case study. This is actually a client that we're working with. We've done some work for. It's a big banking financial system. And you can see this is an example of a digital transformation big picture, big estimate, right? The big picture estimate. So you can see the gray bar here is the overall cost and schedule for the overall transformation. How did we get there though? Well, we got there because we estimated each release, like I just showed you. We depending on the approach or the problem we were trying to solve, we usually started with a scope and a productivity measure. If we didn't have that, we would approach it differently. But we were able to estimate each release. That's what these blue data points are. They're either tasks or releases or product deliveries. You can see this particular bank has multiple vendors working for it. This is actually a bulk release. This is the biggest system, the biggest vendor work that was done. We've got a data migration cost and schedule here. We've got smaller vendor work going on with the smaller batch releases. We've got actually data freeze, security freezes that stopped for months as part of the overall process that they had to follow to make this development process work. So you can see here, this was an estimate for the overall portfolio. Now, if I was this is actually from our master plan tool. If I actually had the master plan tool open, I could actually take a look at the interdependencies in real time, live. I could take this bar, this estimate here, and I could move it forward if the schedule slips and see how that actually impacts the release from another vendor that we might be managing. To see if the code drop is late, how does that affect the cost and effort on the release that this other vendor is working with, or maybe another in-house part of the team. So I can see how all the moving parts come together. I can see the big picture, cost, schedule, effort at the lower level, as well as the macro level. And I can make decisions very early before we even start any detailed level planning. And looks like Martha has a question. Looks like, are they all great examples? Are they all new development efforts? What if we're integrating costs? So these here are not all, no, it does not have to be all new development efforts. And you can totally take into account a COTS integration. The time and effort can be blended into this master plan, and you could actually add additional tasks too. Maybe you have tasks where you already know the cost. You can go ahead and implement that here as well into the big picture. And I'm sorry, I'll let Laura, that was right here in front of me. So I just figured I would go ahead and answer that question. Hope that answered it okay, Martha. We're also going to have a few minutes at the end for additional questions. Challenge number 3, vendor bid evaluations. This is a huge challenge. I keep mentioning vendors. It's a huge challenge as part of the digital transformation process, because usually we're not doing all the work ourselves. We're usually hiring other companies to help us. And why is this hard? Well, because it's tough to determine what's reasonable, especially when you're getting different opinions, people from different development backgrounds, working with different products. Like Martha mentioned, maybe it's a package implementation, might be something different than a custom development piece. So lots of different processes and types of projects. So it's tough to determine what's reasonable on cost and schedule. That's why it's hard. Number 2, sometimes vendors are overly optimistic, right? They're trying to win our business. Maybe they come in with a really aggressive bid and a low price. Maybe the schedule's aggressive. Maybe it's too aggressive. We need to be able to see that early so we don't sign up to something crazy and that's not realistic. Number three, why is it hard? Why do vendor bid evaluations hard? Well, a lot of times one project start time is dependent on another project's timeline. And I'm saying project here. This could be product delivery. It could be release. However you define, your process, right? A lot of our agile clients define it as product delivery, versus project. So, but we're flexible. Show some examples here. How do we meet this challenge? Well, number one, sizing. Someone asked, I think Martha asked about sizing earlier. How do we meet the challenge of vendor bid evaluations? We need to get a good handle on sizing. Number two, we want to be able to leverage industry data in addition to our own historical data if we have any. And I mentioned earlier when this started that, a lot of people think they have to have a ton of data. And the truth is you do not have to have a ton of data. Some clients start with us and do this type of analysis with zero data, and QSM provides data to help, right? So we help you, and in fact, a lot of times when we're talking to people, they'll say they don't have any historical data, but once we start talking with them, we'll say, well, do you know how long that project took? And they'll actually say, yeah, it took 6 months. And well, do you know how many people were on it? Well, we had 20 people. So that's historical data, and we can use that information to help us evaluate vendor bids. So we want to be able to, in addition to our own historical data, if we can get an industry snapshot, that helps too, because wouldn't that be valuable to be able to see, how are our competitors bidding things, right? Are we competitive? Is that vendor that's telling us the cost and the schedule, are they competitive with another vendor? So we can make the right decision. And then number three, we want to be able to compare the promised cost and schedule to what's actually happening. In addition to that, we want to take into account productivity and scope. This is an example again from this is our slim estimate tool. And now we're looking at a scatter plot again. I showed one earlier. This time though, we're using it to evaluate vendor bids. So here we have a trend line. This would be the QSM industry average for the type of project we're working on, or product delivery or release. This blue data point is an estimate. This could be my estimate, or it could be a vendor bid that I like. These triangles here can be one of two things. They can be historical data from vendors, right? Part of your contract might be, I need to see some of your historical data on, or maybe I've worked with that vendor in the past, and I'd like to make it part of the contract where we can leverage some of that historical data from the vendor work in the past. How long did it take the last time you did this? How much did you price it out at that time? So this can be historical data, but this could also be other vendor bids. Maybe I'm looking at 5 vendors. One vendor's coming in way down here. This is effort on the vertical. So this could be cost or effort. One vendor may be way down here, low bidding it. As soon as we see that bid and put it up on the slim scatter plot, we can see that bid is not competitive. They're probably not going to finish at that low of a cost. This could also be schedule, right? They may be promising a 6-month schedule when it really should take 1 or 2 years because they're trying to win our business. But we can see right off the bat with tools like this what's reasonable and what's not within that transformation. And when we're dealing with digital transformation, we're dealing with hundreds of releases, hundreds of projects usually, or at least in the tens, right? 40 to 50, something like that. So each one is very important. And if we're losing money on one, multiply that times 20, that's big money. So it really helps to see what's reasonable and what's not before we choose a vendor. And then once we choose the vendor, we want to be able to track their work. We want to be able to see if they're doing what they promised. And this is actually from our Slim Control tool. And this is actually what we're doing is we're looking at plans versus actuals. I'm not sure if you can see the chart on here, but we're looking at a Gantt chart, staffing, cost, features, and defects in this example. This can be customized. These views can be customized to whatever analytics you want to take a look at it. But in this example, we're looking at a release within a transformation. And by the way, this can be rolled up at the master plan level so we can see projects in flight and whether the vendors are staying on track or not. But here we're looking at, okay, there's their plan in blue. The vendor that's in red is showing where the vendor is right now on schedule. So they're right, plan versus actual. If I look at the feature view, that thin blue line that you see was their initial plan. on how many features they were going to deliver for us. The red data points show the actuals, how much have they actually done for us so far. And you can see that this particular vendor is falling off the schedule. You can see that's why the yellow light is on. Vendor is falling off the schedule. It looks like they're going to be late. They're finding a lot more defects than they had planned. Again, thin blue line is the defect plan that they gave us. They're finding a lot more defects than initially thought. Let's take another view here. Once we get into the project a little bit, we can actually run another estimate. We call it adaptive forecasting. So the Slim Control tool will actually curve fit to the actuals and run new projections for us, forecasts to complete. And it's almost like a GPS for your project. We can dial this down at the release level, and we can roll this up at the digital transformation level. In this example, we're looking at a release within a transformation from a vendor, and you can see the plan in blue. That's where the vendor wanted to be. The green is where they're going to be. So this estimate validates what we just saw on the previous slide, that they're going to be late, right? So now we can see they're going to be late on schedule, late on delivery. Staffing and costs look okay at the moment. So what's actually going on here? They promised they would deliver 308 features or 508 features. They've only delivered 394. They promised us that we'd spend $2 million on the overall release or delivery. We've already spent almost $2.2 million. So we've actually gone over budget already. And with this Slim Control analysis, it actually lets us see that midway through to hopefully save us a lot of money in the long run. So what this tool actually does, it takes the actual work the vendor has delivered, and the actual effort spent, and the actual duration that has elapsed, and it recalculates that productivity index that I mentioned earlier. Remember that measure of efficiency that's calculated, that measure of productivity that takes into account the overall process. It's calculated, and now we can see the vendor promised us a 16.1. They're only achieving a 14.5, and that's why they're late. And your vendor might not even know what a PI is, but you're going to know, right? And they're going to tell you, okay, we're going to finish with this amount of time, with this much money, with this much effort. And you're going to know what that productivity index is because the Slim tool will calculate it for you, and you're going to be able to see if it's competitive. And then when you track their work, you can see if they're working to that level of efficiency. And the other thing is, it doesn't have to be used as a baseball bat. It can be used to negotiate, right? To enhance the relationship, to keep communication lines open with the stakeholders, with the customer. This can also be used on in-house projects. It doesn't have to be used on a vendor. We can use it to keep stakeholders in the loop, and product owners and project managers can keep the client in the loop on how things are going. So it can be a very positive negotiating tool. Challenge number 4, measuring the size of the transformation. Someone asked earlier about sizing, and we're going to talk about it here. Why is it hard? Well, sizing in general tends to be a hard thing to do, whether you're doing a software development project, whether you're doing a package implementation. Whenever you're trying to measure the scope or the functionality, it can be a tough thing to do. We've been doing this for over 45 years. We spend a lot of time helping people with sizing, and digital transformation is no different. It's challenging, it's bigger, it's more complex. So therefore, we have to be more vigilant in the way we define the work, the scope, and the consistency of everything that we do. So why is it hard? Well, determining what sizing metrics to use can be hard. You might be dealing in an agile team. Someone might like story points more than that, and somebody else might want to use epics or features. So we have to bring everybody on the same page because multiple teams think differently. How do we meet this challenge? Number 1, we want to bring consistency across multiple teams. To do that, we're going to use at QSM, we use what we call gearing factors, or factors to normalize the way you define the size or the scope or the functionality that you're delivering or the value that you're delivering to the customer. We use gearing factors, and we have industry gearing factors. So we know at QSM, we know what the typical number of story points per user story is. We know what the typical number of lines of code per function point is. We measure all this stuff, right? I mentioned we're a research company in addition to being an estimation and tools company, do a ton of research. So we have a lot of data that you can use if you're a client, right? And we make it available for you. Also, we help you. We teach you how to do it. We show you how to set up gearing factors so you can communicate from one project team to another. With digital transformation, it's all magnified. It becomes even more important because, again, you're dealing with lots of vendors, lots of teams, all with the same goal to deliver this big transformation within the organization. So we also want to leverage historical data, and we want to leverage, if we can, industry data, because we want to make sure we're competitive. Here's an example of some transformation sizing. You can see on the left view here, we've got multiple techniques within the QSM tools. And you can see ROM size estimate would be one way to approach it. You'd use that technique if you didn't have a lot of data, right? You're starting at the very beginning, and all you know is this thing big or small? It might be the release or product delivery level, right? Where you start. So we can use the ROM sizing technique, which would leverage QSM industry data. And you can also tune that for any particular client. So when you say big or small, it's how you define it. You can use cases. We can break the system into different components, like decomposition sizing here. We might break it into number of reports or number of interfaces or number of components. We can use functional sizing by module. We can use function points. So we're very flexible in the way we want to approach the problem that we're trying to solve. And you have to be, because you're dealing with a lot of people in a transformation process. And usually people are hesitant to get the sizing right. Some people don't even want to do sizing. They want to say, well, it's 6 months big, or it's 10 people big. And that's okay too, but we really want to get a handle on scope if we can. If I look to the right, you can see where I'm showing an example of that. So this is an example of the decomposition where we break something out into more detail. This is an agile template where we've got number of features. You can see small, average, large. I've got epics, I've got stories. Let's look at the features for a second. I've got 8 small features. I've got 4 average features, and I've got 2 large features. If you look at the center column, there's that gearing factor I talked about, the way that we can kind of bring everybody on the same page. Because someone in the company or someone in the team is thinking more in terms of stories, but I'm thinking in terms of features. So what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, I've got 8 features. That's equivalent to, each feature is equivalent to 4.6 stories. I've got 4 average features. Each of the average features are equivalent to 12 stories. So you can see the average features have more complexity. The large ones even more. I've got each large feature is equivalent to 36 stories, but I've only got 2 of those. So you see what we're doing? We're leveraging the scope, and we're bringing consistency to the way we define it, so that each team, which is magnified in a transformation process, can be on the same page. And then we want to be able to refine the information as we get new information. This is the cone of uncertainty. If you're familiar with estimating, you've probably heard of this. This is the idea of, we want to be able to manage the risk. We want to be able to manage the uncertainty. And the fact that very early in the planning process, we have a ton of uncertainty, right? So don't let anybody lie to you. Early on, if someone's giving you an estimate and they're saying it's going to finish in a certain amount of time within a certain budget, they better be taking into account the uncertainty. And that's what the QSM models and tools do. And by the way, we do this on a service basis too. I keep mentioning the tools. The QSM consultants go out all the time and actually support digital transformation types of programs, and they run the tools for our clients as well. And a lot of times there's a lot of uncertainty. There's not a lot of data. So the tools that we use and that we provide our clients have that built in. They're model based, so we can tell the tools and the process, how much uncertainty there is, so that when we run the estimate, we know, okay, this is the estimate that I've got a 90% chance of achieving. This is the estimate that I've got a 50% chance of achieving. So we're taking into account all of that uncertainty to plan more effectively. Now, this view here, the cone of uncertainty, shows here a lot of uncertainty at the beginning, and then as we get closer to delivery, much less uncertainty. So if we get more data, we can refine the estimates and the decision process, but sometimes we just don't have it. So we want to have some tools in place that we can adjust to all that early risk that we have to deal with, especially on a big program with a lot of moving parts. All right, last challenge, better communication is huge. And this is not just in transformation programs, but it's in small projects and large projects. Whether it's software, whether it's a package, whether it's some type of infrastructure development, better communication is always a challenge. We always want to get better at it. Why is it hard? Well, number one, unreasonable expectations. There's always someone that wants to get done faster and for less money. And sometimes the expectations are unreasonable. whether you're on the stakeholder side, the customer side, or whether you're on the vendor side, we have to come to the middle and negotiate. We have to have a good communication vehicle for everybody to get along and to be successful. And why is that hard? Well, because usually there's no big picture view. I mentioned earlier, usually people are at that granular level trying to plan things. So they will, I can tell you that just from doing this for a long time, people will spend days doing a detailed plan to a schedule that's never going to happen. They'll spend hours or days working a scheduled plan to a 6-month schedule when they should have allowed for 2 years, right? Waste of time, waste of money. So what we do is we come in and say, look, let's look at the big picture first. Top down estimating, right? Remember that? Let's look at the big picture first to make sure that we get the targets right. So when we're doing our detailed plan, we're doing it to the right schedule and the right budget. So big picture view is important. Got to have that. And you got to be able to show that to the stakeholders, because usually a lot of and senior management, a lot of times they don't care as much about the granular view. They want to know the big picture. Go or no go decision. Is this going to be successful or not? So getting the leadership that information they need early in the process is important. And that's why it's hard, because they don't get it. Usually they don't get the information they need. How do we meet this challenge? Number one, estimate early, get the targets right before detailed planning. Number two, leverage big picture analytics. Like I just mentioned, get those to the stakeholders, get that to senior management so they can see, and everybody's on the same page from start to finish, so there are no surprises. To do that, you're probably going to need good tools or a good process, good people working for you to help you manage that uncertainty. And then, in addition to leveraging the tools and the models, have an independent view. Look at the industry data to make sure that you're on the right track, to make sure your vendor is competitive or your internal project is competitive. Here's some examples of using those analytics to communicate risk. Here's that staffing view again, right? We've seen this before, right? Ramp up of people. This is actually, I think, one of the problems that we face, right, with the continuous integration was dealing with the upfront, resource churn and productivity changes. You can see here in these views, we're dealing with that resource upfront early. Everybody's on the program early, right? We didn't see a gradual adding on here. Everybody's upfront from start to finish. We're taking that into account. We've got some real-time analysis views here. This is telling me 4 months with 8 people. Well, maybe someone's not happy with 4.7 months. Maybe they wanted to get done in 3.7 months. Well, how can we do that? Well, what if we add people? So if I had the tool open here, I would be able to move this gauge, and I could say, how much will it cost if I add that extra Scrum team in? Will that save me time, and how much more will that cost? Or how much is it going to cost to add that backlog in? And how much longer will it take? And is that reasonable? Or that productivity measure, remember the PI, productivity? What if we could work more efficiently? How much time and money would that save us? Right? If we could work to a 16.1 instead of a 15. By the way, before we sign up to a 16, we want to make sure our historical data shows that we've done that before. So using analytics to communicate risk, you can see here on the risk gauge, it's telling me that I only have about a 5% chance of getting done when I wanted to. I had a target of 4 months. It's saying almost 5 months, only about a 5% chance of getting done when I want to. But the nice thing is I know it early. I know this before we did any detailed planning. I know this early in the planning process. And then we have all this risk analysis that you could use, leveraging analytics to communicate risk. These are actually Monte Carlo simulations, very valuable if someone's trying to push me to a budget or schedule that's not realistic. Here it's telling me 99% chance I can get done within a $2 million budget. If you're trying to get me down in the $500,000 to $1 million range, good luck. It's probably not going to happen. Got a 10% chance. You can see that on the horizontal. Same with schedule. Great chance of getting done in 6 months. If someone's trying to get me done in if a vendor's coming in saying, hey, don't worry, I can get it done in 4 months, about 10% chance. So in the end, we want to be able to use the data effectively. This is actually a snapshot from the QSM industry database. Remember I mentioned that we have one of the largest databases around. We leverage this to help our clients solve these digital transformation problems. Most of the problems that we've heard about, of course, is that, planning and control, right? We're not getting a good handle on this. When's it going to be done? We're losing money. We don't have enough people. We have too many people. All this stuff can be measured using good tools and processes. And you can see here on this view, we've got the QSM snapshot. You can see time on the vertical. You can see size or functionality on the horizontal. And this is a relationship here. This is saying, as projects get bigger, they take longer, right? And then in red, big red here, you see impossible zone. And this is where you do not want to sign up, right? This is a size or a scope or a schedule or budget that no one's ever achieved. And by using these types of solutions, you can see right off the bat if someone's telling you the truth or not and whether to move forward or not. Like, again, do I want to sign up to a 3-month schedule when it should take 6 months? And that pretty much brings me to my close here. So summary overall, to meet these challenges, which are these planning and control types of challenges, we want to estimate early. We want to set realistic schedules and targets and costs. We want to be able to manage uncertainty. That's huge because there's going to be a ton of uncertainty. We want to be able to manage that in the solutions that we use to solve the problem. Not only do we want to look at cost and schedule, we also want to look at sizing and productivity data. That's big. A lot of people don't do that, and that's why they fail. Number 3, we want to use the analytics to communicate to the stakeholders and to management. So management can see early on what's reasonable and what's not. So they can make good decisions, set us on the right path, keep everybody in the loop the whole way. And in addition to leveraging our own historical data, if we have any, if you don't, we encourage you to start trying to get some data pulled together. Also, if you can, get a snapshot from industry to make sure you're competitive, make sure that if you're working with a vendor, their bids are competitive as well. And that concludes the webinar, except got some time here for questions if anybody has any. And thank you again for joining me today, joining Laura and I. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Keith. That was very interesting. I have a couple of questions here for you. One is, can the tools you mentioned support cloud migration?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of the work we do is on cloud migration, a lot of the transformation work. So the difference might be, in the sizing, for example, like cloud migration sizing is going to be a little different than maybe a custom software development project. But yes, absolutely. You can use these tools and models to fully support any type of cloud migration process. Yes, absolutely. And I'm happy to show examples. If you want to reach out after this is over, you can send me an email or call. Happy to show some examples of how we would estimate a cloud migration.
Okay, thanks. And also another question, do your tools only support estimation?
No, actually, we've full measurement process. Really, we have a Slim estimate is used up front for those early estimates, as well as detailed estimating. We have Slim control for tracking and oversight. Once you get into the project, that's that in-flight analysis I was showing you related to the vendor work. It doesn't have to be vendor work. It can be in-house as well. Once you move forward on a project, it's in flight. You can look at the plans, actuals, run new estimates as things change, and then see what the end cost and schedule is going to be to completion. And then metrics we have Slim metrics for post-project analysis, any type of process improvement type of work. If you want to see how your projects compare to industry trends, are you getting better or worse at development? Where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses? That's Slim metrics. We have Slim Collaborate, which is our web-based version of the estimation capabilities. So you don't even have to install this. We can host it for you. You can go in and do estimating in the cloud itself directly.
Oh, okay, great. That was my next question. Are your tools cloud-based? So that's which one again?
So that would be Slim Collaborate. So we have a cloud-based version of the Slim tools, which we would host it for you. You would log in and be able to run all your estimates and be able to centralize all of your databases and your estimates together. And all the stakeholders would have easy views to all the work and you can decide which views you want allowed and which you don't. You would maintain control over it. So yes, Slim Collaborate is a big focus for us, estimating using cloud-based tools. So yes, desktop and cloud both.
And if someone were interested in your tools, how would training work?
So great question. So the training we do training on demand. If someone wanted us to come out, fly out to their facility, we absolutely do that as well. But most of the training these days is done remotely. It's online, instructor led. Um, we have monthly classes that are regularly scheduled. Also, we do training on demand online, where we would schedule a time and you'd have a live instructor, and they would be able to go through and teach you how the tools work. In addition to that, we have a lot of video-based training, self-study, that you can go online and download and learn at your own pace with our support as needed. So very flexible training as you. I think our website says training as you work, something like that. So it's very flexible in the way we deliver it.
Okay, great. I think we'll end the webinar now today. Again, we thank you so much for joining and participating today. We will be making a recording available. An email will go out with the link to that, and you can share that with your colleagues as well. So, again, thank you, Keith. Thank you,
Thanks.
all of you who are listening, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time.